Hello, and welcome to the ProjectWise Administrator Advanced Accreditation course on Managed Workspaces. This is the fourth of a four-part series about what might go wrong. In this fourth part, we will specifically discuss performance issues. This lesson will present an overview of what might go wrong. In other words, troubleshooting. In this part of the lesson, we will discuss performance issues. In this part of the lesson, you will specifically learn about how to identify unresolved paths, how to avoid excessive copyouts, how to minimize workspace reloads when changing files, and about database health issues and how they can affect managed workspaces. We will also look at query simplification. Unresolved paths are variable paths that are defined but don't exist in the data source. These can affect workspace performance because this forces the entire database table to be searched and not find a resolution. While this does not normally affect performance in a significant way, these paths should be cleaned up if reasonably possible. For example, I have seen this directly affect performance when a variable points to a specific file that does not exist. What then is the best way to find these paths? There is a simple interface way to do this. Then there is a more advanced but also more complete approach. Let's look at the simpler approach first. There is a setting in user options called Export Relative Path Errors Handling. This can be found under Tools, Options, then selecting the Settings tab. In the Manage Configurations section, you will find the options. A user can set this to prompt user when they want to check for these errors. This will prompt the user each time they open the file with the Managed Configuration Export Error dialog. This dialog shows the detected invalid paths. You can select Ignore, and this will allow the opening process to continue. Or you can select Abort, and this will stop the process. As a quick note, this is a simpler approach, but I have also found it is not always complete. It is not recommended to keep this set to prompt user. Only set this when checking the workspace. The typical setting would be ignore invalid relative path errors. Let's now look at the more advanced and comprehensive method. When ProjectWise Explorer processes a managed workspace, one of the last steps is to create a composite CFG file which is used to open the file. I refer to this as the .GUID or GUID CFG, as its name is derived from the project document GUID. This file contains the result of all the configurations processed, and it replaces calling the MS local CFG. As a quick note on the contents of this file, if the variable is not found in this file, it will not be found in the configuration variables dialog. This file should contain everything needed to open the file properly. The .GUID is created in the Workspace folder of the DMS working directory. If a variable path resolves to an actual ProjectWise location, the path in the .GUID CFG will point to a DMS folder using the folder ID. Some paths may be found to point to local or network locations, and that's okay. However, if the path shown starts with PW:, this indicates that the path could not resolve to a ProjectWise path and is therefore an invalid location. This next demonstration will show an example of this. What we will do in the demonstration is go to the DMS working directory, open the Workspace directory. For simplification, we will just find the last created .GUID CFG and open that with a text editor. We will then search through the file for PW: instances. Let's look at that now. For this demonstration, what we first want to do is verify where our local working directory is. So we just go into the user settings, check the location of the working directory, and make sure we're in the proper DMS folder structure. We go down to Workspaces, sort by date, and open the top file with Notepad. As we look down through this, we might take note a couple of the variables, how they have been resolved to DMS folder paths. Let's then go and search for PW:. We can find a couple of instances of that. Let's go down and specifically look at MS-UDL-dir. Let's note the location of that directory. If we look at that in ProjectWise and we click the out directory, we note that there's no UDL directory underneath that. Therefore, it's an invalid path. As mentioned in an earlier lesson, if ProjectWise Explorer resolves a variable path to a valid location, it will copy out the files to the DMS folder. If specific files or wildcards are defined, only those files will be copied out. If a variable points to a root folder, all the contents of the folder will be copied out. Hence, to avoid excessive copy out, we need to pay close attention to variables which point to folders that contain files that frequently change. Two examples of this are _dgn_dir and ustnout. It should also be noted that any variables which utilize these variables will result in the files being copied out as well. How can this be prevented? In each data source, there is an option to identify variables to exclude from copyout. This is controlled in ProjectWise Administrator in the Workspaces Manage section under Variables to exclude from copyout. _dgn_dir is automatically excluded, but others may be added. Shown here is the default list of variables to be excluded. Care needs to be taken when adding variables to this list, as it does affect the entire data source. In the next demonstration, we will look at what happens if a variable is defined using the _dgn variable and how we can add that variable to the list. Here's what we will do. We will purge Workspace files, open the file, review Local Document Organizer, and we'll show you how you can actually browse to a folder to limit what's in Local Document Organizer. We'll close the file. We'll add the variable my_dgn_dir, set that equal to dgn_dir in the Workspace CFG file. We'll then reopen the file, review Local Document Organizer, close the file. We will then purge the dgn_dir. We will then show exclude from copyout, add my_dgn_dir to that exclusion list, open the file, and review Local Document Organizer again. Let's now look at this. So I have already opened ProjectWise Explorer, ProjectWise Administrator, and the Local Document Organizer. So the first thing we want to do is go through and purge our workspace. One nice thing in Local Document Organizer is you can use the Browse button to see files checked out under a specific directory. We can then browse directly to the Model 3D folder. Let's then open our file, and we will watch the local document organizer as we go through this process. Let's refresh local document organizer. We see the file is gone. Let's now make a change to the workspace config, adding the additional variables to achieve the copy out that we're looking for. We add my DG set that to equal underbar DG Save this and check it in. Let's now open a file. Now when we check local document organizer, we see a number of additional files have been checked out in the DG Let's purge these for the next part of the demonstration. So what we can do to solve this is to add my DG to the variables to exclude from copyout. This is a pretty simple process. Now when we look at the copyouts, we see that the additional files have not been included. Another performance issue that can be fine-tuned is related to what happens when changing files. You might get this prompt, MicroStation must be restarted to load the new configuration. Do you want to restart now? ProjectWise will not just open the file. It will compare the workspace parameters to see if any changes in the workspace are needed. If changes are detected, ProjectWise will prompt the user to reload the workspace, as we see in this prompt. This, however, can be controlled. ProjectWise Explorer has a way to ignore change variables that are considered insignificant. This is controlled by the variable pw MWP comparison ignore list. The default value is pw mpw comparison ignore list dgndir dgn file. Note, the first variable in the list must be pw MWP comparison ignore list. This variable is set at the application level in the MCM user CFG file. This can be appended at any subsequent level. It can also be set ahead of time. However, if one tries to adjust the variable previous to this level, there needs to be a recognition that this list will be reset at the application level. So any setting of this variable needs to be locked. In this demonstration, we will look at the process of identifying variables that are changing and causing the workspace to reload. This is what we will do in our demonstration. We will open a first file, open the second file. If the workspace prompt appears, we will go to the DMS workspace folder, compare the last two .GUID CFG files, find the variables, add the variables to the Workspace CFG file, reopen the files, and test. Let's do this now. Let's go in and open our first file. This time we just browse to the second file. I'll go to a different folder. And just find any file. Here I get the reload prompt. I want to reload the workspace so that it creates another .GUID CFG file. That way I can tell the differences. We can use Beyond Compare to compare these files. In Beyond Compare, I just set it to show me the differences. I see DG and dir, DG and file is different, but now I see my DG and dir as a variable that changed. We also see USTN user CFG file. So let's go into our Workspace config. And add those variables to the ignore list. For the purpose of this demonstration, I'm going to reset the variable to make sure that it's set correctly. I will then append the comparison ignore list with the two variables that I found. You can save and check in the file. Let's now go back in and follow the same process to open two files. Now that we've got the first file open, let's open a second file. This time I'm just going to open the file through the file menu. It doesn't make much difference. This time we see it did not prompt us with the reload message. Here are a couple of additional notes to consider related to the Workspace reload topic. You can also use logs to determine the variables that are prompting the Workspace reload. In the MCM log XML file, you can turn up the PWise DMS Workspace Manage Compare option to get the variables related to the reload process. You can also use a variable so that the user is not even prompted for the workspace. This variable is MCM reload workspace and set that to equal to. As we note this variable, there are other variables documented in the CMC user CFG file that can affect other parts of ProjectWise and its performance and reload options and various other things. Might be worth just looking through that file to see what's available. The last topic we will address in the troubleshooting lesson is performance issues related to database health or related to the database itself. This is most often seen with the symptom of the workspace process hanging on resolving relative paths. This is actually kind of a misleading indication. It's actually more of a SQL Server issue. The process of resolving relative paths involves ProjectWise Explorer creating a summary query of all the files and folders that need to be copied out for the workspace. By the way, the query can be captured in the server logs by turning up the database section. This slide shows an example query that was captured in the log files. You can run this query directly on the database, and you can test the execution time to see if it's actually hanging. Let's now discuss Microsoft SQL Server. When processing a query, if it exceeds 64 clauses, the query optimizer on SQL Server forces the statement to be run as a table scan rather than the more efficient table seek. As most managed workspace queries are easily over 64 clauses, this caused an issue on larger databases. It should also be noted that because this affects SQL Server processing, it can affect the general performance of other users. For example, if the query is taking 5-6 minutes to execute, this is causing a drag on the SQL Server, and therefore you may see this affecting other users. The indexing and updating of statistics on the database table is also an important issue. At some unknown point, depending upon the size of the database, inadequate statistics can cause this issue as well. To solve this specific issue, it is recommended to have a maintenance plan that updates statistics at least once a week on larger databases. If this hanging does occur in between those, you can run an update statistics DMS doc with full scan. This usually solves the problem. As these issues have been identified, ProjectWise Explorer has been improved to avoid these conditions. In version 10.0.3.264, ProjectWise Explorer began subdividing the query statements into multiple queries if the number of clauses exceeded 63. In the upcoming release of ProjectWise Explorer, users will actually have an ability to adjust the max number of clauses to be lower than 63 if needed. Also, there will be an additional adjustment to structure the query to improve the performance. Lastly, there's a technique to simplify the query, which we found prior to releasing the 3.264. Let's look at that on the next slide. When ProjectWise encounters configuration statements identifying specific files or wildcard statements, similar to what you see here, it creates an individual clause for each line. However, if another variable identifies the folder of those files, the individual clauses are not created since all the files in the folder would be copied out anyway. For query simplification, a summary query can be created that points to the root folder of these files, which eliminates the individual clauses. For example, I typically create a variable called pwcopyout and append this as needed throughout the configuration. In this example case, the query was reduced by 7 clauses. Let's look at an actual example. You'll see in red a number of clauses within the query statement. I then added a number of pwcopyout lines to summarize those statements. What you see in this after statement is the query after those summary variables were applied. So the query becomes much simpler when you're only calling folders. In summary, here are a few best practices. Verify the configuration works outside of ProjectWise locally. Verify paths and use error statements. Regarding resolving relative paths, this is usually a database maintenance issue. You can run a full update of the database statistics. You can also, just as a best practice to simplify the query, create supplemental summary variables as needed. So what should you have learned in this lesson? You should have learned about unresolved relative paths. You should have learned about excessive copyouts. You've learned about the reload process and how to minimize that impact. You've also learned about database health issues, as well as a way to simplify the query statement.
If you found this video helpful, please give it a like. If you want to see more such series, consider subscribing to our channel. Thank you, and see you next time.